Christ is risen, brothers and sisters. Today, the fourth Sunday after Holy and Great Paschal, our Holy Church has as its Gospel reading the healing of a man, as we know, who was paralyzed for 38 years. And for 38 years, he was lying by a pool near a sheep gate, which was known for its therapeutic and miraculous powers. It says by this pool, there were many people who were there who had different infirmities, some blind, some were deaf, some were maimed and paralyzed. And so all of them were waiting to be healed by this therapeutic water by the pool. And it says in the Gospels that an angel would come, and when the angel would come and stir the water in the pool, the first one to fall in was healed. Now Jesus visits this place today in the Gospel reading, and by this pool he meets a man who is paralyzed and waiting for 38 years so that he could fall first in the water and be healed. Jesus, without saying anything else to him, says to him, "Do you want to be healed?" And the man replies and says, "Master, I have been here for 38 years, and I have no one to throw me into the pool when the water is stirred by the angel. And so all the time someone falls in before me." Jesus then says to him, "Rise, take up your pallet, your bed, take up your bed and walk." So the man with all his faith rises, he's fully restored, he takes up his bed and he walks away. When he is questioned by the Jewish priests and he's asked why on the Sabbath, on the Saturday, he's walking, and the man says, "The person who healed me told me to take up my bed and to walk." And when they asked him, "Who was that who healed you?" he said, "I don't know." But then Jesus found this man who was formerly paralyzed and now healed. He found him in the temple. Jesus went to him and said, "See, now you are restored, you are healed. Be careful," he says. He gives him a warning. He says to him, "Be careful that you do not sin, so that nothing worse happens to you." And he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am Jesus of Nazareth." And so the man then finds out who was the person who healed him, and went and told the people and the priests who was the one who had healed him by the pool. I find this a beautiful and very touching story of one of Jesus's miracles. We know that in the Gospels Jesus performed miracles, and only some of them have been given to us as accounts. And the reason for this is that every single miracle that we read about in the Gospels serves a specific purpose for us individually, for us personally. Now this man, he's patient for 38 years. First and foremost, he doesn't lose his hope. He remains there by the pool, waiting patiently so that eventually he can be healed and restored. And inside him, there is still a flame of hope, even though logically it seems as though he has lost all hope. When Jesus asks him the question, "Do you want to be healed?" his response is, "But I don't have anyone." Logically, he knew that it's very difficult for him to be healed if he has no one to put him in the water. But his faith, the flame that he had in his heart, told him to wait there and be patient. And his patience lasted for 38 entire years. And I think that Jesus' question is very important. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to become better? Do you want to be restored? And I think probably the obvious answer is yes. Of course I want to be healed and restored. But I think, and even from my own personal experience as a priest, and as someone as well who has sins and faults, that there are many times where we don't want to be healed. There are many times when we don't want Christ to restore us. And obviously I'm not speaking about our physical infirmities. I think that most people, when something bad happens to them, when they have a physical ailment, when there's something that goes wrong with their eyesight, their hearing, their legs, or they have cancer, or some sort of illness comes to them, they want to be healed. And so they run to churches, they run to monasteries, they run to faith, and they run to God and ask God to heal them. Sometimes God grants this healing, and sometimes He doesn't. Because they saw their physical infirmity, their physical illness, and they wanted to be healed. But this is not Jesus' question, whether or not He wants to be healed physically, and we see this later on. Jesus' question is directed to His soul and not to His body. Do you want your soul to be restored? And I think that the question for many of us is maybe no, not yet. I'm not ready. And when we say I'm not ready, we're saying I'm not ready for that commitment. I'm not ready to give up my lifestyle. I'm not ready to give up what we know as sinful and what we know that separates us from God. I'm not ready to follow the church's teachings as Christ has given me, at least all of them. I can pick and choose some, but the ones that really suit me and suit my lifestyle, but the ones that don't suit me, I'm not ready to take them on. I'm not ready to have the mindset of Christ and not to have a secular mindset. I'm not ready to give up certain sins and habits that I know that are sinful, because I know that if I give them up, then I'm afraid that I will lose something. And I think this is the key word here, fear. Most people are afraid to come to Christ, not because they don't believe Him, but because they are afraid. That they are afraid of changes. And so we say to Christ, I'm not ready to be healed. No, I don't want to be. And so many times we begin to make up our own rules so that we can justify ourselves. We begin to pick and choose what we want from the teachings of the Bible, of the Church of Christ. And we create and fashion our own God, our own Jesus, a Jesus that I think suits us and that we can be comfortable and somehow then comfort our own conscience. But Jesus came here to give us the absolute truth, to give us what we call freedom, to give us life, and to give us love, and not to implant fear in us, not to be afraid of what it means to change, because many of us are afraid of change. But Christ is saying change is good, that we all need to come out of our comfort zone in one way or another. That yes, we should try harder and harder to give up those sinful passions that we want or that we have. And sometimes, even when we go and approach the sacrament of confession, we're afraid to say everything that burdens us or that has burdened us through sin. We say the things that I think maybe the priest wants to hear, but not the things that really weigh us down. And therefore, we see no progress spiritually. We go and we repeat the same things over and over again, and we wonder why we're committing the same sins and that we're left chasing our tail, and it becomes like a circle for us. It's because fundamentally, it's because really, we don't require the change. We want to ask God for the forgiveness of our sins, and we want Him to forgive us. But that forgiveness does not want to go hand in hand with a change of our life, because we're afraid of what that change means. We're afraid of how people will perceive us, how we will perceive ourselves, how we will confront now awkward situations, because I've tried to change my life and I've tried to come closer to Christ. And for many people, that may seem very awkward. And you see, Jesus says to this man who now finds himself in the temple, he's in church. Jesus goes and finds him again in church. And he says to him, "See, you have been well, you've been made well. I've cured you of your paralysis. But be careful that you do not sin, lest something worse find you, lest something worse happens to you." Jesus is saying, look after your soul. Be careful. I've made your body well, but don't use that as an excuse to go and find and chase after sin just because I've healed you physically. And many times, God allows even physical sicknesses so that He can keep us away from what is even more dangerous, which is our spiritual sins. Because one day, our body, we know, will leave. One day our body will die, but our soul will live forever. And Jesus, as a good father, as a good teacher, and as the doctor of our souls and of our bodies, knows precisely what we need. And so, in your prayers, ask Christ for healing. Not so much physical healing, but ask Him to heal your soul. And don't be afraid of this change, because I can tell you that the more steps we take towards Christ, He takes furthermore even more steps towards us. The more we begin to break outside our own zone and comfort zones and try to break our habits and sinful ways, the more He begins to implant within our soul and in our heart this reassurance, this strength, this courage that we can never find once we are separated from God. Hence, why the Christian way many times seems to a lot of people from the outside very strange. Very strange. They see and perceive Christians as very different. If I strike you on the one cheek, then give your other cheek to be striked. If someone slanders you or says something against you, forgive them. Rejoice and be happy. All of these things are strange to the secular mindset. But for a Christian who applies them in their everyday life, they become the most natural way of life, and that natural way of life becomes the most content and joyful and peaceful way of living. Therefore, there's nothing for us as Christians to be afraid of. We have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And if we lose something, then that something was meant to be lost, because our soul had nothing to gain from it. And if we lose something, it means that that something was only temporal and not eternal. And let us hope that what we lose, whether it be our sinful habits, our passions, even friends, sometimes we will lose friends and companions because we have chosen the life of Christ. It means that there was no solid foundation there in the first place. And it was meant to diminish so that you can grow spiritually. And this is what Christ wants for us. He wants us to grow spiritually and to grant and give us eternal life with Him, united with Him, and not to be separated eternally from Him. And this is what every single Christian person or follower of Christ's desire is: to be united with our heavenly bridegroom, who we say is risen from the dead and who grants to us life eternal. Η Αγία Τριάς διαφυλάξει πάντα ημάς. Kalimera and happy Mother's Day to all our mothers. I pray that God grants all of you many blessed and joyful years. Χρόνια πολλά και ευλογημένα.